All right, here we are at Module 5 of Consciousness, Creativity, and Contribution. This video is the first of two about contribution, your contribution, and how to use your contribution to create more success. I hope that you took advantage of the opportunity to go through the guided visualization at the end of the previous module and that you enjoyed that thirst-quenching orange. So, let's begin this module with another guided visualization. I would like you to imagine yourself sitting on the porch of a small cabin located beside a pristine wilderness lake. It is early morning, and the sun has just begun to light the sky and the lake. You are enjoying a cup of coffee while you gaze out upon the lake. It is so still and peaceful. The changing pastel colors of the wispy clouds reflected in the lake are so sublime, so ethereal, that you feel like you are in some painting or a magic fairy tale land. There is the gentlest of breezes, barely enough to cause a few ripples on the lake's surface and to gently rustle the leaves of the trees that surround your small cabin. You close your eyes and take a nice, deep breath, inhaling the glorious aromas of the earthy outdoors, your coffee, the pine trees, and the scent of the lake itself. You are entranced by the moment. You take another nice, long, slow, deep breath, inhaling not just the aromas, the scent of the place, but the very essence, the sense of the place. It feels as if you are being infused with the place itself, that as you breathe, you are breathing in the trees, the lake, the sky, the colors, the smells. The gentle breeze becomes your breath. You realize that yes, you are breathing the world, and that in some strange way, the world is also breathing you. A memory comes to you. Sometime, somewhere, you heard that the air you are breathing is 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen, and that the air you breathe out is 74% nitrogen, 15% oxygen, 5% carbon dioxide, and 5% water vapor. And you realize that even just sitting there, doing nothing except breathing, you are interacting with the world. You breathe out carbon dioxide that the trees around you are breathing in. In turn, they are breathing out oxygen that you breathe in. You are actually exchanging molecules with the trees around you. You breathe out water vapor as you drink your coffee, made with water from the lake you are gazing out upon. It comes to you that you are not just in this world, that you are this world, and that even just sitting there, apparently doing almost nothing at all, you are contributing to your world with each and every breath. You finish your coffee, grab your fishing gear, head down to the lake and climb into the red canoe that has been awaiting you. You push off from shore and paddle out into the lake, enjoying the continuing change of the light as the sun moves slightly higher in the sky. You hear the birds singing their songs, celebrating the dawn of this new day. The haunting call of a loon echoes across the lake. You see a lone great blue heron near the shoreline who has also come to fish on this beautiful morning. You glance behind you and see the pattern of your passage across the surface of the lake. The little waves your canoe is making as it progresses across the lake. The swirling eddies caused by your paddle as it moves through the water. The lake moves with you as you move with it. After a while, you stop paddling, and as you drift gently forward from your momentum, you prepare your rod for fishing, baiting the hook with a squirming worm. A few casts later, you hook a fish and reel it in. Ah, good, a rainbow trout, and the perfect size for your breakfast. As you head back to shore and feeling the perfection of this moment, you whisper a prayer of gratitude to the lake, to the earth, to the sun, now reflecting off the crests of the little waves your canoe is creating as it pushes forward through the water. The loon calls out again, as if in answer to your whispered prayer. The breeze picks up playfully, creating little ripples in the water that intersect with the waves your canoe is making with its passage, and you are entranced by the patterns that emerge from that intersection. Okay, I will leave you to imagine the continuation of that visualization at your leisure. And now, let me tell you a story about a man named Richard before we move on to talk about ships much bigger than your canoe. One cold and blustery autumn day in 1927, Richard was walking along the shore of Lake Michigan, contemplating suicide. His life was a shambles. He was broke and a bit of a drunk. As he was walking along, sunk into this deep depression, a disembodied voice spoke to him, and this is what it said. From now on, you need never await temporal attestation to your thought. You think the truth. You do not have the right to eliminate yourself. You do not belong to you. You belong to universe. Your significance will remain forever obscure to you, but you may assume that you are fulfilling your role if you apply yourself to converting your experiences to the highest advantage of others. That transcendent moment so overwhelmed Richard that he resolved to commit himself to, as he later wrote, to the search for the principles governing the universe and to help advance the evolution of humanity in accordance with them, to finding ways of doing more with less, to the end that all peoples everywhere can have more and more, and to make his life into an experiment to find what a unique single individual could contribute to changing the world and benefiting all humanity. Just wow! From deep despair to a firm resolve to be a contribution in one moment, from suicidal despondency to a life-defining purpose. Talk about life-changing experiences. Okay, we will continue Richard's story in a moment, but let's get back to talking about our two ships, somewhat larger than your red canoe, still creating ripples on the lake. Almost everyone knows the term Spaceship Earth these days. Many perhaps just from Disney's Epcot Center domed attraction. But Spaceship Earth is not just a Disney theme park. It was the term first used and popularized by our friend Richard, who is better known as R. Buckminster Fuller, to instill into public consciousness, quote, a vision for a comprehensive planetary planning that would result in new strategies intended to enable all of humanity to live with freedom, comfort, and dignity without negatively impacting the Earth's ecosystems or regenerative ability. His exact words, not mine. We are on a spaceship, a beautiful one, he wrote. It took billions of years to develop, and we're not going to get another one. Now, how do we make this spaceship work? A quick aside. The image I chose for this slide includes a representation of a particular carbon molecule called fullerene, named after Bucky. This recently discovered molecule is about to revolutionize material science and human technology, and even perhaps human longevity. The bottom right-hand side of the slide shows fullerene joined into a sphere called a buckyball. You might want to research Buckminster fullerene and its other name, carbon-60. Bucky's vision of Spaceship Earth did as much as anything else, including that famous photo of Earth taken from the Apollo moon missions, to transform the way we saw our home planet and our place in the universe. If you wish to know more about Bucky, go to this page on my website, lesliefeger.com/Bucky. On that page of my personal website, you will find a link to an interview Bucky did with Playboy magazine. That whole interview is truly amazing to read and well worth your time. I am now going to read just a few paragraphs from it for you, and this is Bucky speaking. Something hit me very hard once, thinking about what one little man could do. Think of the Queen Elizabeth. The whole ship goes by, and then comes the rudder. And there's this tiny little thing at the edge of the rudder called a trim tab. It's a miniature rudder. And just moving the little trim tab builds a low pressure that pulls the rudder around. Takes almost no effort at all. So I said to myself that the little individual can be a trim tab. Society thinks it's going right by you, that it's left you altogether. But if you're doing dynamic things mentally, the fact is that you can just put your foot out like that, and the whole big ship of state is going to move. So I said, call me trim tab. The truth is that you get the low pressure to do things, rather than getting on the other side and trying to push the bow of the ship around. And you build that low pressure by getting rid of a little nonsense, getting rid of things that don't work and aren't true, until you get to start that trim tab motion. It works every time. That's the grand strategy you're going for. So I'm positive that what you do with yourself, just the little things you do yourself, these are the things that count. To be a real trim tab, you've got to start with yourself. And soon you'll feel that low pressure. And suddenly things begin to work in a beautiful way. Of course, they happen only when you're dealing with really great integrity. End quote. It is my hope that you will be inspired, as I have been, by Bucky's story, to understand that you can make a contribution by the way you go about living your life. You do make an impact even without applying any conscious intent. As you sit under a tree, pondering the majesty and mystery of life on spaceship Earth, by simply just breathing, you are making an impact. You are breathing out carbon dioxide. The tree breathes it in. You are contributing to its health and well-being, just as it contributes to you as it breathes out oxygen for you to breathe. Additionally, each of your thoughts and emotions create ripples in space-time, just as your paddle creates ripples in the water as you guide your canoe across the lake. Now, imagine how and what you can contribute by making conscious and intentional choices, by choosing to become a trim tab and change the trajectory into the future of the whole great spaceship Earth and the vast sea of the universe it traverses. Yes, you can, and yes, you must. Every time you choose love over fear, choose gratitude over resentment, choose compassion over indifference, choose freedom over servitude, choose thoughts of abundance over thoughts of scarcity, you are making an uplifting contribution to the collective consciousness of humanity. More than just making a contribution, being a contribution by the way you live your life, the choices you make about how and what to think and feel. When you choose to believe in yourself as a consciously aware creative being within a consciously aware creative universe, capable of contributing to the ongoing self-actualization of universe itself, you are being that little trim tab that moves the rudder, that changes the direction of the ship. In other words, by changing yourself, you are changing the world. And even the smallest change has a ripple effect. Even though you may not be able to immediately perceive the change, nevertheless, there is a change, because everything is entangled. It is inevitable that you have an effect on universe. The only question is whether you choose to be an unconscious or a conscious participant. Every breath you take, every thought you think, every action you make creates ripples in space-time. It is not possible for you to be inconsequential. It is only possible for you to choose to be intentional or not. And in choosing to be intentional, to choose for the consequences of your existence to be discordant or harmonious. Success is commonly equated with attainment, acquisition, accomplishment, and achievement. This is natural. It is a part of the very nature of human beings to reach for the goals of doing and having more. But there is a higher vision of success, wherein the goal is concordance or agreement of all aspects of one's beingness. The more evolved human being endeavors to establish and to realize ideals in all aspects of self and a harmonious expression of those ideals. Real success, then, begins and ends with learning to be and act in harmony, in tune with, in accord with, in concurrence with, in agreement with all aspects of self and with all creation. Success is not forsaking the spiritual for the material. It is also not forsaking the material for the spiritual. Success is, like all creation, a holistic thing of beauty and balance, concordance and harmony. The universe likes harmony, so if you choose to act in harmony with the universal imperatives of self-realization and self-actualization, you will create success. Not just that desired personal success, but a measurable and meaningful contribution to universal consciousness, which then creates even higher levels of potential success for all. Okay, allow me now to tell you another story about a rare book, a multidimensional molecule present in famous perfumes, and a snake that eats its own tail. Our story begins on September 22nd in 1791 with the birth of the son of a blacksmith who had just recently moved his young family to London. It was an interesting time to be born. George Washington was the first president of the new nation of the United States of America. The French and Haitian revolutions were underway, and Mozart had just premiered his opera, The Magic Flute, in Vienna. If you have read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, you will have a feel for what life in London was like in those days. Incredible poverty and rampant disease, alongside the blossoming of the Age of Enlightenment and the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. To quote Dickens from the opening paragraph of another of his books, A Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. And it was the winter of despair. Before we continue on with this story of our blacksmith's boy named Michael, let's back up exactly half a century in time while remaining in place in London. In 1741, a man by the name of Isaac Watts, who was a prolific and popular hymn writer and who is credited with some 750 hymns, many of which are still in the hymnals of many of today's churches, penned a personal development book with the cumbersome title of The Improvement of the Mind, or a supplement to the art of logic, containing a variety of remarks and rules for the attainment and communication of useful knowledge in religion, in the sciences, and in common life. A hard copy of that book resides in the rare book collection of York University in Toronto, Canada, inaccessible to most people. I am, however, privileged to possess a digital copy of that amazing book. So allow me to read 2 paragraphs from chapter 16, in which Watts is writing about the difficulty most folks have in enlarging the capacity of mind and imagination. Now, bear in mind that this was written almost 3 centuries ago. Okay, here we go. Talk to them of the vast dimensions of the planetary worlds. Tell them that the star called Jupiter is a solid globe, 220 times bigger than our Earth. That the sun is a vast globe of fire, more than 1,000 times bigger than Jupiter. That is 220,000 times bigger than our Earth, that the distance from the Earth to the Sun is 81 millions of miles, and that a cannon bullet shot from the Earth would not arrive at the nearest of the fixed stars in some hundreds of years. And they cannot bear the belief of it, but hear all these glorious labors of astronomy as mere idle romance. Inform them of the amazing swiftness of the motion of some of the smallest or the biggest bodies in nature. Assure them that, according to the best philosophy, that the planet Venus, our morning and evening star, which is near as big as our Earth, though it seems to move from its place but a few yards in a month, does really fly 70,000 miles in an hour. And tell them that the rays of light shoot from the sun to our Earth at the rate of 180,000 miles in the second of a minute, and they stand aghast at such form of talk, and believe it no more than they do the tales of giants 50 yards high. Whew. Amazing words from almost 3 centuries ago that astounded me when I first read them. Now imagine their effect on the imagination of a boy with a minimal education, but a vast curiosity. So, back to our blacksmith's son, who went on to become one of the most influential scientists in history. It is now 1805, and our 14-year-old lad by the name of Michael Faraday takes up a 7-year apprenticeship with a London bookbinder and bookseller by the name of George Ribot. Michael's work there consisted of stitching together, with needle and thread, printed pages in order to assemble the books that Ribot offered for sale. Encouraged by his bookbinder boss and mentor to read the pages of the books he was stitching together, Michael became an avid reader, and when he came upon this book called The Improvement of Mind, etc., etc., he was, like me, inspired by it and committed himself to implementing the principles and making application of the suggestions laid out by Isaac Watts some 50 years earlier. Now, we would know almost nothing of the life of Michael's boss and mentor except for a dedication in one of Faraday's own books written years later. Faraday wrote, "You kindly interested yourself in the progress I made in the knowledge of facts relating to the different theories in existence, readily permitting me to examine those books in your possession that were in any way related to the subjects occupying my attention." It was also Ribot who arranged, through one of his customers, for Faraday to be given tickets to hear a certain Humphrey Davy lecture on chemistry at London's Royal Institute. Faraday took notes of that lecture, which he later showed to Davy, and which led to his joining the Royal Institute as an apprentice to Davy, which was the start of Faraday's distinguished scientific career. The ripple effects of Ribot's encouragement of Faraday continue to this day. Albert Einstein kept a picture of Faraday on his study wall, alongside pictures of Isaac Newton and James Clerk Maxwell. Physicist Ernest Rutherford stated, "When we consider the magnitude and extent of his discoveries, and their influence on the progress of science and of industry, there is no honor too great to pay to the memory of Faraday, one of the greatest scientific discoverers of all time. Although Michael Faraday is most famous for his work on electromagnetism and electrochemistry, for the invention of the first electric motor and the first electric generator, the story of our magical quantum tunneling molecule also begins with Faraday, who first isolated and identified a substance called benzene in 1825. Benzene immediately fascinated many other scientists because its structure could not be identified. It quickly became known that benzene is composed of 6 carbon and 6 hydrogen molecules, but no one could figure out how they fit together, what shape it was, until a chemist by the name of Anton Kekulé had a dream vision. In 1890, during a speech at a scientific conference, Kekulé recounted a dream he had had in the winter of 1861 while dozing in front of a fire in Ghent, Belgium, where he was a professor of chemistry. The dream was that of a self-devouring snake named Ouroboros, which, Kekulé said, led him to envision the benzene ring. These are his words from back then. I was sitting, writing at my textbook, but the work did not progress. My thoughts were elsewhere. So I turned my chair to the fire and dozed. Again, the atoms were gamboling before my eyes. This time, the smaller groups kept modestly in the background. My mental eye, rendered more acute by the repeated visions of the kind, could now distinguish larger structures of manifold conformation, long rows, sometimes more closely fitted together, all twining and twisting in a snake-like motion. But look, what was that? One of the snakes had seized hold of its own tail, and the form whirled mockingly before my eyes. As if by a flash of lightning, I awoke, and this time also I spent the rest of the night in working out the consequences of the hypothesis. As commonly occurs, while Kekulé was consciously thinking hard about the shape of this molecule, his mind was hyperactive in the beta brainwave state. When he moved into a hypnagogic state and his mind moved into alpha and then theta brainwave frequencies, his subconscious could access his intuition and deeper knowing, and the successful solution came to him. Anton Kekulé was the principal formulator of the theory of the chemical structure of molecules. This theory proceeds from the idea of atomic valence, which is the behavior of electrons, which permits the bonding of one atom to another. And he was fascinated especially by the tetravalence of carbon and the ability of carbon atoms to link to each other. This understanding of the ability to carbon to link to itself later leads to the creation of Buckminster fullerene. However, the actual behavior of the electrons in benzene was still unclear to him. So Kekulé modified his proposal in 1872 to suggest that the benzene molecule oscillates between two equivalent structures in such a way that the single and double bonds continually interchange positions. This implies that all 6 carbon-carbon bonds are equivalent, as each is single half the time and double half the time, with the electrons oscillating between one position or another. A firmer theoretical basis for this idea was later proposed in 1928 by Nobel Prize winner Linus Pauling, who replaced Kekulé's oscillation with the concept of resonance between quantum mechanical structures. As an aside, Pauling's work on quantum chemistry inspired the work of James Watson, Francis Crick, and Rosalind Franklin on the structure of DNA. But that is a story for another time. Linus Pauling's theory about benzene's behavior brought us one step closer, but the true nature of benzene continued to be obscured until just this year. We will get to that in a moment. But first, let's talk about symbolic dreams, inspiration, and creativity. Of all the cases cited by psychiatrists, psychologists, and the historians of science to illuminate the role of symbolism in creative thought, none is more famous than Auguste Kekulé's somnolent vision of a snake biting its own tail, a dream that revealed the true structure of the benzene ring to the German chemist. This self-eating snake, the Ouroboros, is an ancient symbol depicting a serpent or dragon eating its own tail. Originating in ancient Egyptian iconography, the Ouroboros entered Western tradition via Greek magical tradition and was adopted as a symbol in Gnosticism, Hermeticism, and alchemy. We first find a description of the Ouroboros in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and later again in the alchemical text, the Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra, who famously later, strangely enough, died from a snake bite. Our friend Plato described a self-eating circular being as the first living thing in the universe, an immortal, mythologically constructed beast. From pre-Columbian Mesoamerica to ancient China to Norse legend, this symbol is both global and ancient. Psychologist Carl Jung interpreted the Ouroboros as having an archetypical significance to the human psyche. It makes its way into our conscious mind time and time again in various forms as the principal mandala of alchemy. Jung writes, "The alchemists, who in their own way knew more about the nature of the individuation process than we moderns do, expressed this paradox through the symbol of the Ouroboros, the snake that eats its own tail." In the age-old image of the Ouroboros lies the thought of devouring oneself and turning oneself into a circulatory process. For it was clear to the more astute alchemists that the prima materia of the art was man himself. The Ouroboros is a dramatic symbol for the integration and assimilation of the opposite, that is to say, of the shadow. This feedback process is at the same time a symbol of immortality, since it is said of the Ouroboros that he slays himself and brings himself to life, that he fertilizes himself and gives birth to himself. He symbolizes the one, which proceeds from the clash of opposites, and he therefore constitutes the secret of the prima materia. Okay, today our friendly Ouroboros, is also the symbol used in modern cosmology to denote the grand unified theory of all matter in universal scale from Planck lengths all the way up to the ultimate size of the universe. All right, let's get back to benzene and to the present day. Just this year, a few days ago as I record this, in March of 2020, nearly 200 years after the molecule was discovered by Michael Faraday, researchers have finally revealed the complex electronic structure of benzene. It turns out that, in order to figure out the behavior of those pesky electrons, we need to think extra-dimensionally. The atomic structure of benzene has been pretty well understood since Kekulé had his dream vision. It is a ring consisting of 6 carbon atoms and 6 hydrogen atoms, one of which is attached to each of the carbon atoms. Where it gets extremely tricky is when we consider the behavior of the molecule's 42 electrons, 36 from the carbon atoms and 6 from the hydrogen atoms. Kekulé attempted to explain their behavior by assigning oscillation or frequency modulation. Linus Pauling came closer with his idea of quantum resonance. But now that behavior of benzene's electrons is clearer than ever. It takes place across multiple dimensions. The mathematical function that describes benzene's electrons is 126 dimensional. That means it is a function of 126 coordinates, 3 for each of the 42 electrons. The electrons, however, are not independent, so we cannot break this down into 42 independent three-dimensional functions, explains chemist Timothy Schmidt of Australia. So what he means is that in mathematically describing the electronic structure of benzene, we need to take 126 dimensions into account. As you can imagine, this is not exactly a simple thing to do. In fact, this complexity is why revealing the structure of benzene has remained a problem for so long, leading to those century-long debates about how benzene's electrons even behave. As it turns out, the electron's quantum tunnel between these dimensions, appearing to magically disappear from one location on our three-dimensional version of the benzene molecule to reappear magically in another location. This multidimensionality not only settles the debate that has been raging since the 1830s, this discovery has important implications for the future development of optoelectronic materials, many of which are built with benzenes. So yes, in addition to its use in perfumes and many petrochemicals, benzene is also used in the development of many optoelectronic devices. And in case you do not know the field, optoelectronics is based on the quantum mechanical effects of light on electronic materials. In other words, how photons create information. As you listen to me, scientists are developing new types of quantum computers based on information localized inside superbenzene molecular bonds determined by our mysteriously behaving electrons and the photons they dance with as they quantum leap about from one dimension to another. And just for fun, I will also point out that carbon nanotubes constructed out of C60 and C70 fullerenes are also playing a part of the future of quantum computing. And so, like our snake, we have come full circle. This has been a long, roundabout story to explain how one man's encouragement of a young lad to read as he stitched pages together has led to breakthroughs in quantum computing. That bookbinder's legacy is profound, and he likely could have never even guessed at what rippled out from his encouragement. You also may never know what effects your smile to a stranger on the street or your words of encouragement to an acquaintance will have, but there is no escaping the fact that you have an effect, even without any conscious intent. Now imagine what effects you can have if you intentionally set about living in such a way as to consciously be that trim tab that causes a change in the course of humanity as it goes about envisioning and creating the future. Yes, you are that powerful. Your individual, self-aware consciousness is the channel whereby the infinite and ineffable universal consciousness self-actualizes. Potential exists. It flows through you, and you actualize it with your vision, your intent, and your actions. You thereby contribute to the whole shebang. Okay, I will conclude this session with this thought. What we do for ourselves alone dies with us, but what we do to contribute to others and to the world remains and is immortal. Okay, that's enough for this session. In the next module, we will talk about your legacy. And don't worry, I will not get too terribly esoteric, and I will keep it simple and practical. No more universal archetypes of the self-devouring dragons of ancient mystical traditions, and no more multidimensional aromatic molecules. On the other hand, I might sneak in a few words from ancient texts. I will see you again in Module 6. Ciao for now.